Hello and welcome back to Simple Times Studios. Today's episode is the finale of Jacob Flint's story. It all comes down to this. Jacob is now a level 8 wise hunter and has completed his cross training in the survivalist class. And he will need every advantage he can get. The National Guard arrived shortly after Jacob Flint finished his shootout with Dr. Godson. The remaining members of Godson's militia were arrested, the bodies were collected, and the damage was assessed. Turns out the militia had made it to Clearbrook while Flint was off in the forest and had managed to do some damage. The town church had lost its stained glass windows to gunfire and its front doors in the struggle to capture Father Gabriel. Josephine's, the town's diner, was torched and burnt to the ground. The rumors Jacob heard implied it was a friendly fire incident, but Joe's was enough of a local institution that even if it was, it wouldn't stop locals from trying to string up militiamen for that alone. No one got between a Clearbrook resident and a stack of Joe's pancakes. After the National Guard left with Godson's people cuffed up and going to learn that religious and political beliefs didn't get you out of an insurrection charge, things slowly started to move on for Clearbrook. Flint half expected to hear something about shooting Godson himself, but nothing seemed to materialize. It wasn't so much that events worked in his favor, so much as it was like no one cared who took care of Godson so long as he was dead. And as the days turned into weeks, Flint stopped caring as well. The summer was continuing on, and there were too many other things left to do. Too many things that needed to be done in between reflecting on his latest misadventure and refining his techniques. Sloppy. If that had been the lodge instead of a TV preacher full of the sins of pride and greed, Jacob would have not lived to tell the tale. The Historical Society that Quimby mentioned made their pitch in a town meeting Flint attended, and left with an agreement in hand. There was a lot less resistance to the idea than the sheriff may have originally feared, thanks to recent events. The idea of restoring the old bunker and turning it into a tourist attraction for history buffs to bring in revenue was already appealing to a town that suddenly needed money. Having a place to hide if something happened again was a very compelling bonus as well. Things had quieted down so much that Flint was almost able to forget about the other challenges that lurked off in the shadows. He had finished Timothy Thunder's book and was left with more questions than answers, especially knowing that Conlinx the Conqueror was a real being that was still out there. And after their misadventure with a chimera robot, Tim had been trying to suss out the story that Flint was living through. The two of them spent almost as much time talking about the lodge that tormented Flint as they did talking about Tim's conlinks. Flint didn't know as much as he wished he did, but by talking about it with Tim, he started to make sense out of the pieces he did know. It was after one of these chats that Flint had headed home and gone to bed, not knowing that it would be the last time he would be sleeping in his own bed for a while. When he woke up, Jacob Flint found himself in a small room with wooden walls, a single door, and no windows. Waking up with a start, he nearly fell out of his cot and landed on the cold stone floor. This was definitely not his room. Rising up to his feet, he promptly searched around. There weren't any windows. The only light was a single naked bulb high in the ceiling. There was only one door, and the only furniture in the room was the cot he had been sleeping on with a large footlocker at the foot of his bed. In it was a change of clothes, all of his gear, and a typed note on a perfectly flat piece of computer paper. "Welcome, Jacob Flint. We have been waiting for this moment for a long time. But so have you, we imagine. You know who we are. No need to waste time on introductions. You have until midday to get as far away from our encampment as you can. At midday, the hunt will begin. In the name of the Great Horned One. The note was unsigned, but like it said, Jacob already knew who wrote it. The only people that had the ability to pull this off. The Lodge. Just like he didn't need to know why they gave him all of his adventuring gear, including his weapons, with 3 magazines worth of ammunition for each of his guns. He knew the Lodge's eldritch deity, the Wendigo-like Great Horned One, demanded some sort of fairness in his hunts. So if these mask-wearing nut jobs gave him his whole arsenal, it was because they had something special planned. Which meant he needed to move if he wanted to have a prayer of getting out of here before he had to find out what they had planned. Getting dressed, lacing up his boots, and loading his gear into a backpack that was at the bottom of the footlocker, he threw the pack over his shoulders and tried the door in front of him. It was unlocked. Of course it was. And opened to a small hallway with 6 other doors. 2 to his left, 3 along the opposite wall, and one at the far end of the hallway that had sunlight streaming out of it. He knew which one he needed to go out, but if the other 5 doors were like his cell, then there might be 5 more people here, and while he would gladly say he was an asshole, he would also say he wasn't that much of an asshole. So before he left, he made sure to bang loudly on each door. Is there anyone inside the other 5 doors? I give it a 50-50. And 56 says no. He's by himself. Not a sound. Not even a groggy groan from a heavy sleeper. Looks like he was the Lodge's only captive for now. Still dealing with the unease of everything way too easy so far, Flint tried the door at the end of the hallway and immediately was outside. Outside, Jacob found himself on an open porch overlooking a steep mountain slope. Almost immediately, the wise hunter tried to make a note of everything he could see. The building he was held in was a small dwelling that seemed to be built partially into the mountainside. To his left and right were more mountains. To his right was also the rest of the resort complex that his building seemed to be a part of. Jacob had no doubt that was where his hosts were currently hiding, even though everything in this resort looked like it had been abandoned for the better part of a decade. Yet far, far in front of him, deep within an evergreen forest at the foot of the mountain range he currently stood on, was a small town. It was too far away for him to even make out the architecture of the buildings, but that was still the only other sign of civilization he could spot, and likely the only friendly kind of civilization as well. Looking down at his watch and checking the time, he found that it was mid-morning. He only had a couple hours before he found out if this was all real or someone's idea of a prank. Oh, who was he kidding? No one he knew had the resources to pull off a prank this elaborate. Walking down from the mountainside cabin, at first he started by following a gentle sloping trail, but ditched it the moment he felt it veer from the forest below and started heading back towards the resort complex. Unless he was horribly mistaken, there was only trouble that way, and he would be fighting at a disadvantage. If he could make it down to the forest, he might be able to fight on more even footing, or at least separate them to make them easier to fight one-on-one. Because there had to be more than one of them here. They wouldn't have given him his shotgun, his scoped hunting rifle, and a handful of sharp pointy objects if there was just one of them. It was slow going down off the trail at first, but once Flint adjusted his footing, he soon started to pick up a steady pace. He had just made his way down from the mountain and crossed through the tree line when the sun reached the midday position. High noon, according to his watch, and still no signal on his phone. Hardly surprising, but maybe there was a landline phone in town he could use. More unnerving was a sudden wolf howl that echoed from the mountain resort behind him. A wolf howling in the middle of the day. Drawing his shotgun from his backpack and making sure it was loaded, he quickly picked up his pace as he started to run through the relatively flat ground of the forest. Mindful of his footing, he made sure to keep his steps light to avoid disturbing too much of the ground and keeping to the harder surfaces. If he didn't leave footprints, he would be that much harder to track. Okay, as a result of this, Flint uses his terrain mastery ability from his survivalist training to move without a trace through the forest. Pursuers cannot use wisdom, survival skill checks to track him. The bright sun had started to disappear behind the dense forest canopy above him when he heard the wolves howl again. Again, looking at his watch, he was nowhere near nightfall. And while it was not at all unheard of for wolves to be active during the day, something about those cries sounded wrong in some way he couldn't quite put his finger on. Undeterred but still walking with a quick, purposeful stride, Flint continued to walk in the direction of the small forest town he spotted from the mountain. As he walked along, he continued to spot signs that something was not quite right. It was a warm summer day. There should be birds singing in the trees, small animals like squirrels foraging for food, and other ordinary activities. Yet the birds took flight with a panicked squawk at the sight of him, and all the other forest creatures took one look at him and promptly fled in what could only be described as abject terror. It was like he was marked as something completely unnatural, or was just barely ahead of something horrifyingly unnatural. Whatever it was, he was going to find out soon. Okay, do the lodge hunters catch up with Flint? I give it a 50-50 chance. Flint is using every trick he knows to make time and avoid leaving a trail, but there are special abilities he doesn't know about yet. And 12 says yes, they do catch up with him. Jacob had just crossed through the tree line into a small meadow, signs of the town he was looking for barely visible through the trees in front of him, when it happened. Shadows and flashes of dark gray teased the edges of his vision when Flint spotted his pursuers. Shotgun raised, he immediately spun around to face his attackers, or at least get a better look at them. What he saw almost shocked him. There were 8 of them. 8 creatures that looked like lanky timber wolves with thick, shaggy gray fur pelts. If timber wolves could walk upright and look at him with surprisingly human expressions on their canine faces, that is. There was still a good 60 feet or so between him and them, and neither party was moving at the moment. Werewolves? He asked almost on instinct, his shotgun still raised, though he certainly didn't like these odds. The 8 werewolves laughed. No. A blessing of the great horned one of his greatest, to assume the form of one of his hounds. The leader crowed with a throaty growl. Flint thought he recognized the voice of Lion Mask, the leader of the lodge. 8 of the highest of the lodge turned into werewolves, or something that sounded just as bad. Well, if this was it, Flint wasn't going to pass on a chance to run his mouth. So that's what all the blood sacrifices were for. All the suffering and trafficking? That's it? Do you have any idea the power we wield now, little rabbit? The pack leader growled. Considering you look like a fursuit bought off a Temu, I can guess. Flint snarked and ran. None of his foes could escape the sound of his laughter as he disappeared back into the tree line and ran to the town. Disappearing back into the forest and becoming that little bit harder for the Horned One's hounds to track, Flint soon arrived through the trees again and into the small town. A small, abandoned town. 2 streets, 1 intersection, and a handful of houses that likely belonged to the resort workers back when the resort was still open. Flint jumped a broken fence that was practically kindling and disappeared into the nearest empty house. He needed to hide and throw them off his trail for a while. Those canine noses couldn't be just for show. They had to have his scent. which meant he needed to try hiding someplace they wouldn't think to look. Okay, does the house have an attic? Does the attic have a drop-down ladder entrance hidden in a closet? I give the first one a 50-50, but the second one feels a bit more unlikely, so 81 on the first one, so it doesn't matter because there is no attic. Flint could tell from the exterior design that the house didn't have an attic, which meant he needed to make his way down into the basement and hope for the best, even though that's where most horror movies started going downhill for the protagonists. Hiding and slipping downstairs into the basement, he turned and then turned again before hiding in a storage closet that the original owner had built underneath the basement stairs. Closing the door shut behind him, he stilled his breath and pointed his shotgun towards the closet door as he listened. There was a sound of heavy footfalls somewhere outside the house, then something violently sniffing the air. Then the footsteps stomped around upstairs and stopped before the same thing sniffed the air again. Beads of sweat started to form on Jacob's forehead. Did the stench of the old house mask his scent well enough? He knew how to evade a canine nose, but he didn't think his captors would become wolves. A few tense seconds later, the hunter left the house, presumably to search another abandoned building. Flint exhaled and opened the closet door ever so slowly, half expecting to see one of the Horned One's hounds standing there leering at him. But the room was empty. Nothing but random trash, pieces of pipe, and broken scraps of wood was there to keep Flint company. He could use that, though. Okay, Jacob is going to make a wilderness survival check to make a trip trap out of wire at both the doors leading into the basement, and a nail trap at the foot of each stairway leading into the basement. He rolls with advantage and gets a 16 on the roll to set the trip traps. He rolls again to set the nail traps and gets a 27. This passes both checks to set up the traps in the book, so he sets up the trip traps without trouble and sets the nail traps quite handily. They're definitely doing that 1d4 plus 4d6 damage now. Working quickly, Flint found a length of wire long enough for both door frames leading into the basement and set them up at the perfect ankle height for tripping dollar store werewolves. He then found some planks half softened by rot and quickly drove some rusty nails and screws through them with the flat of his hatchet. He set them up perfectly so that whoever ran through the doors down to the basement would land face first into a plank studded with sharp nails. A bit gorier than what was shown on Home Alone, but still a true McAllister special through and through. And Kevin never fought werewolves either. Backing away from the entrances to the basement and towards the utility room to assemble one last trap, he still had to deal with the problem that he was boxing himself in, but the broken basement window in the utility room looked big enough that he could fit through no problem. Still, that was a problem for later. Right now, he needed the most of this perfectly good piece of pipe. Okay, a third survival check with advantage. He gets an unnatural 20 and assembles his last trap. Mechanically, it's the nail trap that does 1d4 plus 46 damage again. Thematically, it's a pipe trap from Home Alone 2. The one that knocked both the wet bandits down 3 stories or something. Okay, setting up another tripwire, Jacob rigged it to drop down a length of heavy metal pipe. He thought it was fitting. It was the same trap Eyes tried to use on him ages ago, on the adventure that started this whole thing. The trap set, Jacob put his fingers in his mouth and let out a long, piercing whistle. There was no way they could have not heard that, and sure enough, there was a single long, low howl and the sound of heavy footsteps coming up fast. Much too fast for Jacob to outrun on foot if he tried. Yet only 3. The hunter was certain he counted 8 when the lodge caught up with him outside of town. First one went through the back door and down through the house. It tripped, fell down the stairs in a comical-sounding crash before landing face first into the nail trap with an agonizing yelp of pain. Then came another trying their luck through the bulkhead connecting the basement to the outside. Less noise than the first, but still an agonizing yelp. That was 2. Number 3 almost got sight of Flint, smiling as it walked through the doorway and not realizing it had tripped Flint's trap until it got hit in the face with a metal pipe. Much like its companions, this lodge hound fell to the floor in pain. There was a suspicious twitch that filled Jacob with dread. Then the werewolf lodge hound reverted back to human form and fell still. Expecting a trick, he slowly crept over and poked the fallen lodge cultist with the barrel of his shotgun. No, this one was dead. Creeping out of his hiding spot and searching the rest of the basement, he checked the other 2. Same thing. Jacob wasn't sure what was going on here, but he was grateful he didn't have to find some silver to wound these creatures with. He still had 5 of these furry bastards left, and given how much pain and suffering they caused, he would be damned if he let any of them survive if he could help it. Okay, shotgun raised. He exited the basement, out through the bulkhead, and kept his eyes and ears open for the other hounds. Keeping his back firmly against the damaged house wall, he scanned the backyard in front of him. Okay, are the remaining hounds anywhere in sight? I give it a 50-50. And 81 says no, he has a reprieve for now. Whether that's because they gave him one or because they think he's dead is not important. There wasn't anything in sight as he exited the ruined house and looked around. If the remaining lodge members were watching him, they were from somewhere out of sight. Moving around to the front of the house and keeping hidden behind the cover of overgrown hedges, he looked out at the rest of the ruined suburban village. Most of the houses looked like they either collapsed or would be close to it, but there were still a few that he might be able to hide in if he had to. Yet all of them had the same style as the house he had just left. A single-level ranch with a basement and no attic. He was pretty sure they wouldn't give him the chance to try the same stunt again, but still, even a few minutes to hide or a place where he could force them into narrower quarters might be enough to give him an edge. Something that would help him or keep him from fighting 5 opponents at once. Another howl echoed through the air as the afternoon wore on. It wouldn't be long now, and he doubted they would go easy on him again. Thinking quickly, he ran across the street and into the house in front of him. It was not a good plan. The house stank of mildew and the lingering aroma of homeless transients. And Jacob was pretty sure the building would collapse if too much went on inside, but perhaps that was exactly what he needed to even the odds. Okay, is the house in danger of collapsing? I think it's very likely due to the age and lack of maintenance of the building. Okay, 17 on the Oracle dice says yes, it won't even survive this fight. The floor creaked with a moan that scared Flint even more than the canine-like humanoids hunting for him outside. Yet there was no time to think about it. The howls were practically on top of him. They were right outside the front door. He needed to move and get out of the house before his pursuers came running in and possibly collapsing the building on top of them. Okay, Flint is going to make an athletics check to race ahead of his opponents. He gets a 19 on a 1d20 plus 4. Breaking out into a full run, Flint was halfway to the kitchen and the back door when his opponents forced their way through the front door, bashing it down and breaking through the dry-rotted wall on either side of it. Flint kept running, ignoring the ominous squeak from the wood beneath his feet as the floor began to bow and bend in ways that sent chills down his spine. It would not be long now. Running through the back door, he slammed it shut behind him with a smack that caused the entire building to shake. Several yelps echoed from the house as it continued to shake, and finally collapsed on itself with a thunderous crack and a crash that shook the earth. 4 of them trapped under the rubble. He had one left. Circling back around, shotgun in hand, he walked back out to the cracked pavement and towards the intersection in the middle of the development. His breath slowed down as he stopped in the middle of the intersection and listened. The last one had to be out there. The leader couldn't have run away, right? Surely that wouldn't be a good look to run away after getting that blessing from his great horned one. Okay, is the leader of the lodge still out there and moving closer towards Jacob? I think it's very likely for the reasons Jacob just thought of, and at an 8 on the percentile die, the Oracle agrees. The leader of the lodge, the notorious lion mask that had haunted his dreams for years, tried to sneak up on Jacob, but Jacob Flint's adventures had made him too good of a hunter. Flint spun around. The two of them stood a good 90 feet from each other. The shotgun was never lowered as the two opponents stared at each other. So, this is it. All the schemes, all the hunts, it all came down to this, Jacob replied. The wolfman snarled softly. Even now you show no respect to our... I'll show respect to you rich occultists the moment you stop being such a disappointment. Flint shot back automatically and pulled the trigger on his shotgun. One way or another, this ended now. Okay, rolling for Flint's free attack. Flint gets a 10. This does not beat the Hound's defense of 15. The shot went a little wider than Flint would have liked, hitting a nearby mailbox instead of the transcended lodge cult leader. It almost could have been portrayed as a warning shot if the two combatants weren't already far past the point of warning shots. Flint quickly chambered another round into the shotgun with a reassuring ka-chunk before the fight began in earnest. Okay, initiative. Flint gets a 4. The lodge leader gets a 5. This is going to be interesting. Taking advantage of Flint's brief pause, the lodge master ran forward to try and close the gap before getting the two of them into melee. Long, menacing claws glistened in the fading afternoon sunlight as the hound closed in on the hunter. The gap between the two of them still shrinking, Flint focused as well as he could. This was it, he thought. It all came down to this. Okay, Flint is going to spend a focus and use Hunter's Mark on his archenemy. He then fires again, getting a 14, misses. He will fire twice more, spending another focus point on the third shot. 19 and 6, only one shot hits. Flint does 7 points of damage, and the Lodge Master has 38 HP left. Flint then runs 30 feet. Raising his shotgun against his shoulder, he fired off a trio of shots rapid fire. The first and third shot missed, but the second one found its mark and impacted squarely in the hound's chest, sending a small splash of blood across the pavement. Jacob then started to try and run backwards, keeping his target clearly in sight. Undeterred by Flint's attack, the Lodge Master charged in, closing the gap between the two of them despite Flint's retreat. Those claws were just about to swing at him. Okay, Flint attacks again. He rolls a natural 20 and a 19, a critical hit and a hit. The first attack does 11 damage. The second attack does a 4 for a total of 15 damage. I'll spend another focus point to roll the second attack and get a 9 instead, so Flint does 20 damage. The Lodge Master has 18 hit points left, and the shotgun is empty. Flint uses his move action to draw his axe as he drops his shotgun. With his opponent right on top of Flint, there was no room for error or a chance to miss. The last two shells found their mark. Collectively, both attacks did brutal damage to the creature's torso, causing blood spray and drip along the road. After the last round was fired, Flint dropped the empty shotgun and grabbed his wood axe with both hands. The Lodge Master was in melee and made his attack. Okay, the hound hits with a multi-attack. His bite hits and his claws do not. Flint takes 12 points of damage and has 62 HP left. Biting down on Jacob's shoulder and drawing blood, he attempted to claw his torso, but Flint batted the discount werewolf's hammy paws with his axe and pushed the creature away. Despite bleeding from his shoulder, Flint grabbed his axe with both hands and swung with all his might. Okay, the axe is a versatile weapon, meaning I move up to a D10 if I use both hands. Flint swings and hits with a 23. He does 8 points of damage. The Lodge Master has 10 HP left. He swings again and misses with a 10. Not bad considering he's still in melee. Swinging with all his might, his axe blade bit into the wolfman and pulled away, slick with blood, while the Lodge Master backed away. Flint attempted to swing again but missed, slicing empty air. No, not today. He tried to chase after his opponent. "No! You're not getting out that easily!" he shouted. The Lodge Master started to break into a full-out run, drawing on reserves of strength that Flint hadn't seen before. Flint dropped his axe and drew his hunting rifle. At the rate the wolfman was running, Flint wasn't sure he wasn't going to get more than one shot at this. Okay. Flint rolls to attack with his hunting rifle and gets a 13. I'm going to spend another focus point to re-roll. And I get a 23. That hits, and I get a 9 on damage. Time seemed to slow down as Flint lined up his shot. The report of his hunting rifle sounded muted as he pulled the trigger. Then the mighty Lodge Master collapsed as the bullet connected with his torso, causing him to fall face first onto the worn pavement. Flint lowered his rifle ever so slightly and walked over, flipping the Lodge Master over with a soft kick as he loomed over the changing man. Whatever insanity that caused the Lodge Master to change into that monster was starting to leave his body. Flint pulled the bolt action back on his rifle and chambered in another round, then lowered his rifle completely. After the transformation finished, Flint glared at the masked man, then stomped on the Lodge Master's throat. The prone man's windpipe was crushed between Jacob's hiking boot with a single sickening crack. Not a word was exchanged during this final moment. Flint felt it was a waste of time. Pulling the intact wooden lion mask off of his opponent, Flint looked down at the man he had killed. He expected someone he would have recognized. A politician, right or left wing, or a media mogul from Hollywood. No, the man behind the mask was someone he didn't recognize. Searching the dead man's pockets, Jacob found a set of car keys for a Ferrari, a sleek smartphone he put back in the man's pocket, and an ornate leather wallet stuffed with cash and all sorts of cards. This was when he finally learned the name of the leader of the lodge, Alexander Everest III. The name was vaguely familiar to Jacob, a banker in charge of one of those international hedge funds. Not that it mattered now. Dead was still dead. Shaking his head, Jacob gathered up his discarded gear, then pocketed Everest's car keys, wallet, and after a second thought, the dead banker's phone as well. He then hiked his way back to the remote resort the lodge was using for their latest retreat. The sun had finally begun to set as he returned to the resort compound. There was still one last thing he needed to check. Are there any other prisoners or captives here? Are they still alive? I say 50-50 for both, and 93 on the first one says no. There isn't anyone here. Flint searched the building as well as he could. There was no one else except Jacob and the lodge members he dealt with. A large garage in the basement revealed a luxurious collection of supercars. On reflex, he pulled out the car keys and pressed the unlock button. A hot red Ferrari beeped happily in response. Flint opened the garage to the outside and got into the car. 10 minutes later, he was on the highway with the car radio playing classic rock and roll. There was nothing but him in the open road as he drove off into the sunset, and Journey's Wheel in the Sky blared on the radio. Everything he had been fighting for, it was all behind him now. From now on, his life was truly his own. End of story. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoy the Axman Chronicles.